The rain hammered against the windows of Murphy's Tavern as Sarah Martinez pushed through the heavy wooden doors. Her Navy uniform was soaked, and her combat boots squeaked against the worn floor. She had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift at the naval base, and all she wanted was a quiet drink before heading home to her small apartment. Sarah was not what most people expected when they thought of a Navy SEAL. At 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight build and gentle brown eyes, she looked more like a college student than one of the military's most elite warriors. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and despite her exhaustion, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of intense training and real combat experience. The tavern was packed with off-duty military personnel and locals. Sarah found an empty stool at the far end of the bar and ordered a beer. She kept to herself, checking her phone for messages from her younger brother, who was studying engineering at college. Their parents had died in a car accident 5 years ago, and Sarah had taken on the responsibility of supporting her brother's education with her military pay. At a table near the center of the room, 6 Marines were getting louder with each round of drinks. They were all big men, fresh from basic training, full of themselves and looking for trouble. Their voices carried across the room as they bragged about their strength and made crude jokes about the women in the bar. "Look at that one over there," said Marcus Thompson, pointing at Sarah. He was the largest of the group, standing 6 feet 3 inches with arms like tree trunks. "Plain dress up in a military uniform. Probably works in the kitchen or something." His friends laughed, encouraging him to continue. "I bet she's never seen real action," added another Marine named Jake. "These Navy types just sit on ships all day." Sarah heard every word, but kept her eyes on her phone, hoping they would lose interest. She had dealt with this kind of attitude her entire military career. Many people looked at her and saw weakness, never imagining the hell she had been through to earn her place among the SEALs. The truth was that Sarah had spent 3 years in Afghanistan and Iraq, leading dangerous missions behind enemy lines. She had saved countless lives and earned more medals than most soldiers see in a lifetime. Her teammates respected her not because she was trying to prove anything, but because she had proven everything that mattered when bullets were flying and lives were on the line. "Hey, Princess!" Marcus called out, his voice slurring slightly. "Why don't you come over here and let real soldiers show you how it's done?" The bartender, an older veteran named Tom, shot a warning look at the Marines. "Keep it down, boys. The lady's not bothering anyone." But Marcus was too drunk and too full of himself to listen. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart. Don't ignore me when I'm being friendly." Sarah slowly turned around on her stool. Her voice was calm and steady when she spoke. "I'm just here for a quiet drink. I don't want any trouble." This only made Marcus and his friends laugh harder. "Listen to that," he said to his buddies. "She's scared. Probably going to cry like a little princess." The other Marines joined in with their own comments. "Maybe we should call her mommy to come pick her up," said Jake. "This is no place for a little girl." Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came before violence. She had learned to recognize this feeling during her first combat deployment when her unit was ambushed outside Fallujah. The same calm that had kept her alive in firefights was settling over her now. "I asked nicely," she said, still facing the bar. "Please leave me alone." Marcus took several steps closer, his friends following behind him. The other patrons in the bar were starting to notice the confrontation, but most looked away, not wanting to get involved. "What are you going to do about it, Princess?" Marcus taunted. "File a complaint with your commanding officer? Write a strongly worded letter?" That's when Sarah stood up. She moved slowly, deliberately, placing her beer on the bar with careful precision. When she turned to face the 6 Marines, something in her demeanor had changed completely. The exhausted woman who had entered the bar was gone, replaced by something much more dangerous. Last warning, she said quietly. Her voice carried across the suddenly quiet room. Walk away. Marcus laughed and reached out to grab her shoulder. Or what? You'll cry on my uniform? That was his first mistake. His second mistake was not recognizing the look in Sarah's eyes as she assessed the threat in front of her. She had seen that same overconfident expression on enemy fighters moments before they learned why Navy SEALs had such a fearsome reputation. The training kicked in automatically. Sarah had spent years learning how to neutralize multiple opponents, often much larger than herself. Size and strength meant nothing if you couldn't land a hit, and these Marines were drunk, sloppy, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Marcus's hand was still reaching for her when Sarah moved. The bar erupted into chaos, but it was over so quickly that most people didn't even see what happened. Within seconds, 6 Marines were on the floor, and Sarah was standing calmly in the middle of the room, not even breathing hard. The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in Murphy's Tavern stared at the small woman who had just accomplished something that seemed impossible. The Marines groaned on the floor, alive but thoroughly defeated, trying to figure out how their easy target had become their worst nightmare. The first Marine to go down was Jake, who had been standing closest to Sarah's right side. He never saw the elbow strike coming. Sarah's movement was lightning fast, a sharp upward strike that caught him perfectly under the jaw. His head snapped back and he dropped like a stone, unconscious before he hit the floor. Marcus was still reaching for her shoulder when Sarah pivoted on her left foot and drove her right knee into his solar plexus. All the air rushed out of his lungs in a painful wheeze, and he doubled over, gasping. Before he could recover, Sarah grabbed the back of his neck and brought his face down to meet her rising knee. The impact was precise and devastating. Marcus crumpled to the floor, blood streaming from his broken nose. The third Marine, a stocky man named Rodriguez, tried to grab Sarah from behind. He wrapped his thick arms around her waist, lifting her off the ground, thinking his superior size would give him the advantage. Sarah didn't panic. Instead, she drove her elbows backward into his ribs with surgical precision. The sharp impacts forced him to loosen his grip, and Sarah immediately threw her head back, connecting with his nose. Rodriguez stumbled backward, his hands flying to his face. Sarah spun around and swept Rodriguez's legs out from under him with a perfectly timed kick. He hit the floor hard, the back of his head bouncing off the wooden planks. He lay there dazed, staring up at the ceiling lights, wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quickly. The fourth Marine, Danny, had been reaching for a beer bottle to use as a weapon when Sarah's attention turned to him. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it in a way that human joints weren't designed to bend. Danny screamed in pain and dropped the bottle, which shattered on the floor. Sarah maintained the pressure on his wrist while driving her free hand into his throat in a controlled strike that sent him gasping to his knees. Tommy, the fifth Marine, tried to tackle Sarah while she was dealing with Danny. He came in low, hoping to use his football training to bring her down. Sarah saw him coming in her peripheral vision and sidestepped at the last second. Tommy crashed into an empty chair, but quickly rolled to his feet, ready for another attack. Sarah didn't give him the chance. As Tommy turned to face her, she launched herself forward in a flying knee strike that caught him in the chest. The impact lifted him off his feet and sent him sliding backward across the floor. He ended up against the wall, clutching his ribs and struggling to breathe. The last Marine, Kevin, had watched his 5 buddies get demolished in less than 30 seconds. He raised his hands and started backing toward the door. "Hey, look, I don't want any trouble. We were just having some fun." Sarah's eyes never left his face. Her voice was deadly calm. "Fun? You call harassment and intimidation fun?" Kevin continued backing away, but Sarah followed him step for step. Every other person in the bar watched in stunned silence. "Your friends are going to need medical attention," she said. "Are you going to help them?" or are you going to run away and leave them here?" Kevin glanced at his fallen comrades, then back at Sarah. He was torn between self-preservation and loyalty to his unit. Before he could decide, Sarah made the choice for him. She moved forward quickly, not to attack, but to demonstrate just how helpless he was. Her hand shot out and stopped just inches from his throat. Kevin flinched and stumbled backward into the door. "I could have hurt you just as badly as the others," Sarah said quietly. "But I'm giving you a choice. Help your friends or leave. But if you leave, don't ever let me see you harassing innocent people again." Kevin nodded frantically and rushed to Marcus's side, helping him sit up against a bar stool. Blood was still flowing from Marcus's nose, and his eyes were unfocused. The other Marines were slowly starting to move, groaning and checking their injuries. Tom the bartender was the first person to break the silence. He had served in Vietnam 40 years ago and recognized a combat veteran when he saw one. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Lady, what the hell are you?" Sarah walked back to the bar and calmly picked up her beer. Her hands were perfectly steady, and she showed no signs of the adrenaline that should have been coursing through her system. "I'm someone who wanted to drink in peace," she said simply. The other patrons in the bar began to whisper among themselves. Cell phones came out as people started recording and taking pictures. Within minutes, videos of the aftermath would be spreading across social media, though no one had been quick enough to capture the actual fight. Marcus was finally able to speak, though his voice was thick and nasal from his broken nose. "What are you?" he asked, echoing the bartender's question. Sarah looked down at him with something that might have been pity. "I'm a United States Navy SEAL," she said. "I've served 3 tours in combat zones, and I've been trained to neutralize threats much more dangerous than 6 drunk Marines." The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Several of the other military personnel in the bar stood up straighter, recognizing that they were in the presence of one of the most elite warriors in the world. "You're lying," Jake said from the floor, though his voice lacked conviction. "Women can't be SEALs." Sarah pulled out her military ID and her SEAL Trident pin, holding them where everyone could see. "I graduated from Bud's training 2 years ago. I was the 3rd woman to ever complete the program. I've led rescue missions in hostile territory and saved lives under enemy fire." The Marines stared at her credentials in shock. Everything they thought they knew about military hierarchy and combat effectiveness had just been turned upside down. Marcus, who had called her princess just minutes before, was now looking at her with a mixture of fear and respect. "Why didn't you tell us?" Rodriguez asked, still holding his head. "Because I shouldn't have to prove my credentials to have a quiet drink," Sarah replied. "And because you didn't ask. You just assumed I was weak because of how I look." Tom set another beer in front of Sarah, waving away her money. "This one's on the house. Thank you for your service, ma'am." An hour later, the 6 Marines sat at their table with ice packs pressed against various injuries. The paramedics had come and gone, determining that while the Marines were battered and bruised, none of their injuries were serious enough to require hospitalization. Marcus's nose would heal, Rodriguez's concussion was mild, and the others would recover within a few days. Word of the incident had spread quickly through the base. By the time Sarah finished her second beer, several high-ranking officers had arrived at Murphy's Tavern. Among them was Commander Patricia Hayes, Sarah's commanding officer, and Colonel James Mitchell, who oversaw Marine operations at the base. Sarah stood at attention when Commander Hayes approached. "At ease, Martinez," Hayes said. "I hear there was an incident." "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied. 6 Marines were harassing me. I asked them to stop multiple times. When one of them tried to put his hands on me, I defended myself." Colonel Mitchell walked over to the Marine's table. Marcus tried to stand up, but the colonel waved him back down. "Stay seated, son. I've already heard what happened from the witnesses." The colonel's voice was stern as he addressed the 6 Marines. "You men should be ashamed of yourselves. Not only did you harass a fellow service member, but you picked a fight with one of our nation's most elite warriors. Do you have any idea who you were messing with?" Marcus looked up through swollen eyes. "She said she was a SEAL, sir, but we thought—" "You thought wrong," Colonel Mitchell interrupted. "Petty Officer Martinez here has more combat experience than all 6 of you combined. She's been decorated for valor under fire, and she saved the lives of dozens of American servicemen. While you boys were still in high school, she was leading night raids against enemy positions in Afghanistan." The Marines exchanged uncomfortable glances. The reality of their situation was starting to sink in. They had not only harassed an innocent woman, but had insulted and attacked one of America's most decorated war heroes. Commander Hayes turned back to Sarah. "What's your assessment of the situation, Martinez?" "They're young and stupid, ma'am, but they're not bad soldiers," Sarah said, surprising everyone. "They just need to learn respect and discipline. A few weeks of extra duty should teach them that actions have consequences." Colonel Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "You're being remarkably generous, considering they called you Princess and tried to intimidate you." Sarah walked over to the Marines' table and looked each of them in the eye. "I've seen real enemies," she said quietly. "Men who wanted to kill me and my teammates. You're not my enemies, you're just ignorant. But ignorance can be fixed with education." Marcus was the first to speak. "Ma'am, we owe you an apology. We were wrong, and we're sorry." The other Marines nodded in agreement, though they all looked thoroughly humiliated. Jake, who had been unconscious for several minutes, was still struggling with the reality of what had happened. "Apology accepted," Sarah said. "But I want you to remember this feeling. Remember how it felt to underestimate someone based on their appearance. Remember how it felt to be completely outmatched by someone you thought was weaker than you." She paused, looking around the room at the dozens of people who were still watching the drama unfold. "Most importantly, remember that respect isn't earned through size or aggression. It's earned through actions, character, and dedication to something greater than yourself." Commander Hayes stepped forward. "The 6 of you will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning. You'll be assigned to work with Petty Officer Martinez for the next month. Maybe you'll learn something about what it really means to be a warrior." The Marines groaned internally, but they knew they had gotten off easy. Assaulting a superior officer could have resulted in court-martial and dishonorable discharge. Working with Sarah was more of an honor than a punishment, though they didn't fully understand that yet. As the officers prepared to leave, Tom the bartender called out to Sarah. "Hey, can I ask you something? How did you do that? I mean, those are big guys, and there were 6 of them." Sarah smiled for the first time that evening. 10 years of training, Tom, but the real secret isn't physical strength. It's mental preparation. I knew I could handle them before they even stood up from their table." She turned to address the entire room. "Violence should always be the last option. I tried to avoid this fight multiple times, but when someone puts their hands on you without permission, you have the right to defend yourself. Size doesn't matter if you have the right training and the right mindset." The crowd erupted in applause, and several veterans came forward to shake Sarah's hand and thank her for her service. For the first time in months, Sarah felt truly appreciated for who she was, rather than being judged for what she looked like. As she prepared to leave, Marcus called out to her one more time. "Ma'am, how can we learn to be more like you?" Sarah paused at the door. "Start by treating everyone with respect, regardless of what they look like or where they come from. Understand that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest people are often the ones who choose not to use their power. And remember that being a warrior isn't about picking fights. It's about being prepared to fight for people who can't fight for themselves." She walked out into the rain, leaving behind a room full of people who would never forget the night they learned that heroes come in all sizes, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks the most peaceful. 3 months later, Marcus Thompson graduated from advanced combat training with honors. His instructor was Petty Officer Sarah Martinez, who had taught him and his 5 friends that true strength comes from discipline, respect, and the courage to protect others. None of them ever called anyone princess again, and they became some of the most respectful and effective Marines on the base. The story of that night at Murphy's Tavern became legend among military personnel, passed down as a reminder that you should never judge someone's capabilities based on their appearance. Sarah continued to serve with distinction, eventually becoming an instructor herself, teaching the next generation of warriors that honor and respect are the foundations of true strength.